All right. So, welcome everybody to ArChi-TECH Network number 23. Let's talk extraterrestrial architecture with Biggs Julian, or as I should say, Julian OCAMPO-SALAZAR. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Yeah, sounded good to me.
Thanks so much for spending the time. I think this is we've been meaning to do a space one for a little while now, actually. But I think this is kind of a nice timing since our recent project was just released, and we've done another project as well. So I thought it's a good time to talk space. So maybe to give you a little bit, the audience, a little bit of an introduction to yourself, Julian, and feel free to add to this afterwards. So yeah, Julian is a fellow Bigster. He's a senior designer here at the big New York office. He's also the now in-house space architect or space architect. I think you should get a new title as space architect or something.
Mhm.
But I was just looking. It's one of those things that, like, when you work with people in the office, you don't always know. I've browsed across their LinkedIn profile and like looked at their background, but it seems like you've got quite an interesting background. You've definitely like traveled a lot as an architect. I know you're originally Colombian, but it looks like you've worked for in Spain, in Canada, in the US, in Amsterdam, in Copenhagen. You worked for a bit at Big in Copenhagen, and now you work here in New York, but you've also worked at places like MDR, DV, DSR, and a little bit of time at Shop. So yeah, it
The-
seems like you've definitely traveled as an architect,
yeah,
right?
yeah, this is all true. I moved around a lot when I just sort of was a recent graduate. You know, I just wanted to see how different people design different things, and then I ended up moving around a lot. In Spain, actually, I worked with Sal Gascano. During that time, I sort of moved to Nairobi and lived there for like 4 months, where we were building a project.
Oh wow.
You just it's a lot of spots, but yeah, it's. I think it was like a sort of a conscious decision to learn a lot while your life's still really flexible and you can just move around.
Yeah, that's one thing I definitely recommend. And in fact, when Kai was doing the talk, that was his biggest recommendation for young architects is to travel. I did a similar thing. I've been away for almost 10 years, but I kind of set bases in Hong Kong, and then traveled from Hong Kong, and then New York, then went back to London, and then came back to New York and stuff. So yeah, any young architects out there, be sure to. Yeah, I think it's one of those professions where you can actually travel quite easily. Whereas like a lawyer or a doctor or something like that, like you're kind of constrained by the license being very local. Whereas architects, especially as design architects, you're very free to move around.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that was probably one of the things that drew me to architecture in the first place, which is the ability, like your skill set is more or less universal. So you're able to travel a lot, and in that traveling, learn a lot about the people, and the places that you live in, just through basically having to design for them, right?
Yeah,
Like it's very interesting, like the different sort of standards that people have for how steep, for example, a staircase is, or how
right.
big your shower should be, or whatever.
Yeah,
So, and then through that sort of traveling, you start to realize that the human condition is like super flexible,
yeah,
so
very
that
adaptable.
you know what I mean, super adaptable. So it eliminates a lot of barriers for anyone, I think, on understanding like what things can be and where the sort of boundaries are for what is good.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed exactly. Yeah, we're very adaptable, but also very similar. I feel like people are just driven by the same thing. It's amazing how similar we are, but also different. If that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. Like people generally want the same things. You want a little
Right.
bit of privacy. You want like, yeah. So you want those things. You want to be sort of respected. All this other stuff. Uh, but then the kind of standards are very different. When I was living in Nairobi, I went to a bar in this area called um, what's the name of it? It's one of the largest informal settlements in Africa. So the place is absolutely insane. And so we went to a bar there, and the bar is in the third floor of one of these like very hastily made shacks, right?
Mm.
It's you can imagine it's an informal settlement. So we're on the third floor, and then we're just like, all right, so where do we go to the washroom? And then it's like you just go over there, and then you go there, and you enter, and you're immediately in like a shower, and then like, and you're just like, all right. So basically, you're standing in the urinal that is sometimes a shower for someone else. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah,
So it's like that kind of thing. You're just like, oof, this isn't. It would not be possible in other places, but it still works. It's still a shower. You know, it's still a
yeah,
urinal. So
yeah. Interesting. And then, of course, I mean, that kind of ties in nicely to you maybe having an ambition to travel beyond Earth. And so, yeah, you've kind of become the space architect of the office over the last, I guess it was a year or two. You've been working on our two recent space projects in collaboration with NASA and ICON. And how did that come up? Like, did you have an ambition to be did you have like an interest in space, or it just kind of happened?
that is, yeah, I mean, I mean that is such a coincidence because I didn't really have any kind of particular sort of curiosity towards space. I've had all kinds of curiosity about other things, but I had never sort of fixated on space.
You weren't like
But
doing space camps as a kid and stuff like that.
no, none of that. I mean, none of that. So, but then what happened was that we, with Icon, together sort of formulated this project for NASA for the Project Olympus, what became Project Olympus, which would be the first permanently sort of occupied building or permanent structure built outside of planet Earth. And so ICON is an additive manufacturing company, so basically a 3D printing company. And then my background, my sort of academic background, benefited me in that I went to MIT for my master's in architecture, and while I was at MIT, I worked a lot on the Fab Lab. I was a Fab Lab monitor, and I was always around sort of additive manufacturing and just fabrication in general, and so that background sort of prepared me for what would be the kind of juncture of those two things, right? Fabrication, additive manufacturing, and then design. And then the kind of challenge just came into the office, and they thought that I would be a good match for this. So I started working on it, and then it became sort of a passion of mine, where learning more about the subject, and the more you start learning about what it took to go to the moon, the kind of stuff that happens on the moon, the environment of the moon, and all this other stuff, you get really interested in how it all works.
Yeah, I could totally see that. It's like I mean, it's such a specialized thing. I mean, in the office as well, you can work on so many different things, but once you develop that knowledge, because it's not like you're designing for down the street in Manhattan or something. It's
No, it's yeah, exactly. It's like and there's probably, I don't know, 5 architects in the world who
right.
can say that. I know that there's this other office based, I think it's based out of Australia and of London, Hassel.
Yeah, Hassel are into space. I mean,
Hassel,
Foster's
yeah,
doing a bit of space stuff.
exactly, a little bit,
Is
but it's not a very common thing to
Yeah,
do in a sort of serious way, because there's a lot of sort of proposals that show up like, oh yeah, there's going to be like a floating hotel, orbiting hotel, whatever, but it doesn't have the kind of heft
yeah.
and research sort of base that that the other or sort of possibility, seriousness than these other projects have.
There's a lot of Instagram space architecture. Like, I don't know if you
Exactly.
saw there was a recent one, I think a month or two ago, of like embedding habitats into this cliff on Mars, I think it was, or the moon. And it was obviously like provocative, but you just think of the challenges of just getting there, and then you've got to like
Yeah, and
file out
there's
a
like
hole,
sometimes,
get these
yeah, and
things
then
up there. Like,
and it's like correct. Sometimes it's like glass everywhere and all
yeah,
kinds of stuff, and you're just like, dude, this is not even, it doesn't. The like the gulf between the reality of the Mars environment and the possibility of having like this kind of structure there is so vast that it doesn't even sort of make sense, which is what we were fighting against in our projects, which is how do we keep that gulf to a minimum, right? So that the conditions on the moon, for example, uh, are like basically what we're designing is very close. It's at least the next step between what we have now and what can be a habitat.
yeah,
So we don't want to design something that is so far out to become almost kind of technologically and sort of logically impossible.
yeah. I think that's one of the things I really enjoy about um, the projects in the office is it's about and it's still, as a technology side, we're obviously testing new tools and stuff like that, but I think the way that we approach things, it either has to work like right now or very, very near in the future, not like, um, thinking about what's going to happen in 10, 20 years, although that's obviously a part of it as well. But yeah, there definitely seems to be two trends of like architecture firms getting into the space world. And then also there's like a few specific architecture-y space startup companies, like I think there's one called AI Space Builds or something like that,
Mm.
where they're actually, I think they were trying to build a 3D printed habitat in upstate New York, but I think it kind of stopped or something like that. But yeah, it's kind of
Yeah, I
interesting
mean,
to see these two, like this new niche.
yeah, but you do know why that happens, though, no? Like I can, like, basically, throughout the history of lunar exploration and space exploration, it has not been possible to sort of think of the moon as a permanent habitat or a place where you can permanently be there, because there was no water, right? So, and we need water to live. So it was only until 2009 that there was a discovery made on water on the north and south poles of the moon. And then further sort of studies, and now in 2019, I think it was an Indian sort of probe that confirmed the kind of presence of that water on the south and north poles, so on the permanently shaded regions of the north and south poles of the moon. So basically, the presence of water makes it so that it is a lot more likely that we will eventually have a base on the moon, because without water we just can't exist. And bringing water to the moon, that the cost of transportation would be so great that it would be sort of basically make it impossible to do that, to sort of be there permanently and be ferrying water from the Earth to the moon would just not work.
Is there also sort of artificial atmospheres being created for this? Because I know obviously the moon doesn't have an atmosphere, right? So is there some sort of artificial atmosphere that's going to be created as an urban district, perhaps,
I
or is it
don't.
going to be sort of in suits,
I
sort of the
mean, I
space
don't.
suits?
I don't think so. I think it's going to be very limited, sort of pressurized vessels, right? So either, and by vessel I mean the habitat or the transportation vessels that you will be using to move around the moon, because it's just such a great sort of difficulty to build there, at least in the near future, that any sort of great structure is already prohibitive. And so and the pressurization that is needed on the moon is so kind of great that it would be extremely difficult to create a large structure, like a like a dome, for example, to create your own sort of atmosphere within that dome. That would just be extremely difficult, and to just have an atmosphere on the entire moon would just be, I think, impossible. At least the way that it is being thought about now. And the other thing is this: The moon is not being thought of as a place to go and sort of inhabit permanently. So the current thinking is that you would use the moon as a sort of launching pad for further exploration, right? So if you have water, that means that you have an element that you can split into oxygen and hydrogen. And then with that, you can create oxygen for breathing or living, and then also hydrogen as a sort of fuel for rockets, right? And for further kind of exploration. So what would happen is that you create a kind of a base from which you can, fill your rockets and take off in a much more sort of fuel efficient way than if you were to do so from Earth, because the gravity on Earth on the moon is about 1/6 of the gravity of Earth. So that means that to just get out, you would just need 1/6 of the fuel. So all of that just makes it so that it's much more likely that if we end up going to the moon, we would use the moon as a sort of trampoline or a launching pad for further exploration, not to actually just try to turn it into a second Earth.
Yeah.
That's super, super cool. I can only imagine how many students would love to go down this path of designing on different planets. And I know there's a lot of students in the audience, so I do want to ask two questions that might be relevant here. How much unlearning do you have to do in order to sort of design for the moon? Because obviously we kind of spend 5 to 7 years learning specifically to design for the Earth, right? Everything from the site conditions to the gravity to the atmosphere to the materials available here. So how much of that do you kind of have to throw out the window and approach it with fresh eyes? Or do you use the same approach and methodology for that?
You sort of use your curiosity and your knowledge to kind of propel you forward, right? But yes, the conditions are absolutely different. But it's interesting. Interestingly enough, one of the things that we did at first when we started designing for the moon was to look at environments here on Earth that have this sort of vernacular architecture that basically builds with elements from that site. So igloos for the Inuit, or these sort of houses in North Africa that are sort of dug from the ground and have incredibly thick walls and all this kind of stuff, right? So what we're trying to do is, when we go to the moon, obviously, is what we're going to do is try to take as much advantage of what we will find there. So you basically have to try to learn from the human experience so far what works in terms of taking advantage of the resources that you find, and then sort of extrapolate that to the moon. Okay, so what resources do we have here? How does this whole gravity thing impact our kind of space design? Obviously, you have to have like taller ceilings, otherwise you're going to be banging your head against every time that you take a step, right? Because a sixth of the Earth, the gravity, having a sixth of the gravity of Earth means that any little sort of jump that you make or any little step is going to send you 6 times as far or 6 times as high. So you have to start thinking about all these things. But the biggest thing that you have to think about, which we haven't even discussed yet, will be the radiation that you get on the moon, the kind of cosmic radiation. So there are so many other things that you have to think about when you're designing for space compared to what you think about when you're designing for Earth. So you basically have to have the skills that you get in school and then start adding to those skills a whole bunch of other things. It gets really interesting, actually, when you start thinking about our sort of lunar base as an extension of our vernacular architecture.
I think it was cool to see. I remember one of the projects had like a giant basketball net that was
Oh yeah,
10 foot high or something. It would be wicked to have like a space Olympics where you'd just be destroying the long jump, the high jump, and
Well, I mean, like everybody would be Michael
Yeah.
Jordan out there, to just like jump and like stay floating on air on the air. Yeah,
I like the consideration. Yeah, you just wake up in the morning, make yourself a cup of tea, and you take like a slightly bigger step, and you're flying into the ceiling because you've forgotten to design a higher ceiling.
exactly. Then you have to start thinking about like, all right, we can't have those many like as many kind of sharp corners everywhere, because then your ability to control your movement is going to be so sort of kind of awkward at first. So you have to sort of figure out how to
Yeah,
how to not
it's
bang your
almost
head
like
against
making it
things and how to protect.
childproof in a way. But
Exactly, in a way, yeah. Because we're all going to be sort of learning how to move our bodies
yeah,
up there.
yeah, I think that's a kind of interesting point to maybe move on to. Actually, Faisal, did you have a second question, or you want to?
Okay, yeah. So my second question was, earlier you talked about sort of moving in these vessels, right? I'm just kind of thinking about what impact that would have on society, because obviously we kind of get used to gathering in large amounts. Although pre-COVID, of course, gathering in these large arenas and stadiums and conference halls and all that. So that isn't going to be possible, obviously, in an environment like that. So, what kind of effect is it going to have on human beings and our sort of societies and social functions?
I mean, that's interesting because I think the character of of the lunar habitats, that the way that they are being conceived is not as a replacement for Earth, right, or for our current habitats, as much as it is as going to be like as I said slightly earlier, a jumping point. So like smaller facilities, in kind of smaller sort of like the kind of stuff that you have, for example, in Antarctica, where you have these smaller vessels. But then if you start adding them up, it is possible that you start getting, kind of bigger, larger spaces. And I think that might happen. It might. We might be able. I think that as we get better at doing this, at building stuff outside of Earth, then it might happen that we're able to build like slightly larger spaces or for more gathering spaces and all this stuff. But the initial thought is not to have the moon sort of replace Earth. I think that's not the idea. It's to just have moon as a kind of stepping stone, or like a much smaller base, not a place where we would go and create like a fully formed city where an entire society would work. Um, so so from that point, I think the kind of social aspects will remain mostly on Earth, and then the moon would have a slightly different sort of function. I don't know if that. I hope that answers the question.
No, yeah, that definitely answers the question, and
Yeah.
it sparked another question I have, which is I guess how much astrophysics do you have to learn in order to sort of design for the moon? Because it feels like you almost have to learn a whole new discipline as an architect, right? To start designing for a completely different planet. So yeah,
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
much do you have?
I mean, so basically, when we were working on our lunar project, we went through, I think it was about a month and a half or 2 months, where we didn't really design anything. We were mostly just reading all the papers that NASA published, because it's actually kind of amazing how uh, how much information NASA has to put out into the world as public information. All of their like studies of the characteristics of the lunar regolith, the temperature characteristics of lunar regolith, the kind of radiation mitigation properties of lunar regolith, the earthquakes, lunar quakes, I guess. All this information, the chemical composition of lunar regolith, all of the studies done by the Apollo missions, all this other stuff it's out there on the NASA website. It's online. You can go look it up. So we basically spent a good 2 months looking through that. Also, continuously sort of sharing our conclusions with the team at NASA that was sort of coordinating the project with us, and then so we got to talk to a few experts within NASA that know a lot about cosmic radiation, for example, know a lot about regolith composition. So we talked to their planetary geologist, who was just an amazing person to have as a resource. So we were sort of learning all of this stuff. The things that you learn here on Earth that are a little sort of instinctual, things that you just learn, just because, yeah, grass, oh, yeah, that's green. Or like, yeah, mountains, oh, the mountains have this shape. Or, oh, dust behaves this way, or sand behaves this way, right? So none of that applies because the sand on Earth is extremely different from the sand on the moon, or what is called lunar regolith. So we basically had to sort of relearn everything from not only looking at NASA papers, but also talking to people who know a lot about this stuff, and then sort of like basically start from scratch on, okay, so for example, like the slump angle on lunar regolith is much steeper than it is on terrestrial kind of sand. So things of that nature, you just have to like and kind of learn from the experts. And it's funny because like you think about, okay, so what does it matter the slump angle of the lunar regolith, or what does it matter the slump angle of sand? Like who cares? But when you're building on the moon, the behavior of your material, so which is the lunar regolith, is extremely, extremely important. And since the only thing you're going to have is this lunar regolith, you're going to have to use that regolith for everything. So you use it for building your walls, you use it for shielding yourself from radiation, from cosmic radiation. You're going to use it to build your roads. So you have to sort of learn everything there is to learn about that one material. So yeah, I mean, we did have to basically start from scratch on learning all these things.
You basically went to space school for a couple months.
Yeah, exactly. We did, and we had the best teachers that you can have. I mean, and the people at NASA were so accommodating and so generous with their knowledge, and so sort of excited and happy to be sharing all that they know. So it's an amazing group of people. And they're generally very happy to kind of share their knowledge with you, and that, I'm so very, very thankful for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's super cool when you were just presenting it in the office to learn a lot about like just the stuff, just bits of what you guys had learned about. That was super interesting. But I think we're in this kind of new, interesting era of this new space race, right, between various billionaires and NASA and SpaceX and Blue Origin, reigniting this ambition to go back to the moon and Mars. And when you talk about it, not many people are like, oh, what does that got to do with architecture? And like we've kind of, answered that question already a little bit. But one thing people always kind of say or ask is like, shouldn't we be focusing on Earth before we look beyond it? But I think people don't quite grasp, for example, the race to the moon. The technology that was developed from that is just trickled down into so many different things, and this kind of huge goal expedites construction of technology in many different industries. And one that we've kind of touched on a little bit already that's very applicable is kind of 3D printing, right, or additive manufacturing. What are your thoughts on 3D printing at the moment? Because I was definitely, if you asked me this maybe a couple years ago, I was like, I think it's really cool. I'm definitely excited about it on a small scale, but I was like, I just don't see us printing, real buildings or like even just a home anytime soon. But then, having seen companies like Icon and Branch Technology showing that they can actually print stuff today that's usable, I was like, wow, this technology is actually moving way faster than I thought. But yeah, having done
Yeah,
some designing kind of in that space. What do you think of 3D printing?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's an extreme, it's like super kind of exciting segment of the construction industry. Companies like Icon, for example, they have already basically they built the first 3D printed house in the United States, the first kind of permitted 3D printed house in the U.S. And so it's not a fantasy, of course, and this thing and their technology is sort of jumping kind of leaps. And they keep making bigger and better printers. So I think it's a really exciting technology to continue to sort of to work with and to explore. Those guys are doing incredible things, and the applications are just totally kind of amazing in terms of speed, in terms of what you can do with it, and how it continuously sort of expands the boundaries of what you can do with the 3D printing technology. I'm very excited for the future of that, and yes, as you said, like a few years back, you would be like, well, this is kind of gimmicky, it doesn't sound applicable. But just go look at their houses that they have built, and there's a few projects here within the office that we have, because we have an extensive collaboration with Icon, and there are a few projects within the office that are basically looking at that, right? So some of them look at the really long-term future of 3D printing. So, what if we 3D printed everything? And some of them look at a shorter future of 3D printing, which is like, all right, how do we embed 3D printing and the logic of 3D printing into current building design, right? So how do we merge the current sort of techniques of building with 3D printing? So what can 3D printing sort of replace as we move sort of slowly inch towards a fully 3D printed sort of environment? So I think that's where the most interesting part of it is, which is this kind of super weird mixture of 3D printed and current sort of technology and current techniques, where it's like a weird mix that you don't know if it's and I think that's where a lot of innovation is going to be happening within the next 10 years.
Yeah, it's definitely moving way quicker than I thought, and it's an exciting space. I think it's that both 3D printing and this idea of creating buildings on the moon and Mars. I think it's slightly edging us back towards being a true architect, like a master builder. The 3D printing on Earth, you've got that image or that idea of like what you design, you could literally Control P and actually print the thing to the machine, and we could reconnect with that act of making. One of the other things I was going to ask, or kind of make an observation of, was I thought that like when you've presented the Olympus projects and the more recent Mars habitat thing, like the Olympus projects for me, I loved, because it was just like it seems to be getting back to that mix of architecture and engineering, or an architect is the center between an artist and an engineer, right? You kind of, an architect is that character in the middle, and I feel like a lot of, as architects, and as a lot of you come out of university, you're kind of more towards that art end, and we're almost like creating provocative images and all that kind of stuff. But it seems like when you're designing for things on the moon and Mars, like it has to be that perfect balance of like these things have to perform a certain way and do certain things. So how did that feel like to kind of transition? I guess everything is so driven or engineered based or kind of function based. I thought the Olympic project was a great example of that.
Yeah, it's funny because you're totally right. There's not a lot of room for sort of balancing performance against aesthetic, right? On that, because we were presenting that project, the Olympus project, in front of astronauts, in front of the NASA headquarters, in front of people who've been to space, in front of people who have seen lunar habitat proposals 200 times, and you don't want to, you don't want to be showing this to them and be like, and then having like, well, how are you going to deal with the pressure? And then you're like, oh well, we're hoping that this thing is going to get invented, or oh, how are you going to deal with cosmic radiation? Oh, by then there's going to be a technology that's going to be dealing with
Yeah.
that, right?
Okay.
So you have to, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? It's like because you don't want to look like an idiot, just like coming up with ideas that like, oh yeah, that looks nice, but then it's
No,
useless
I think
on the
that's a
moon.
great
You
point,
know?
and I think maybe coming back down to Earth should. I always wondered, like, I remember there was this one crit that I was sitting in, and the architecture school was being constructed on, and there was like outside the window there was like scaffolding, and builders were like building and doing their thing, and I was like, what if we brought in those guys and got them to sit in the audience, like instead of having crits of just architects, and like we can sometimes go into this bubble of provocative architecture stuff.
Yeah.
Having some of those people in the room to call to call you out.
Yeah, and that's cool. Like, yeah, I mean, if you want to do this kind of academic, kind of provocative stuff, that's fine. You can do that, but then don't ask someone to build it. Because then what? If you don't think of something as for it to be built, then how are you going to go to someone and be like, hey, can you build this?
Yeah.
If you have zero consideration for those things, then it's like, okay, if you thought about this and you think this can be buildable, then why don't you try to build it and then let me know how it goes, right? So it's always, at least for the projects that I work on, I'm always trying to make sure that we're not, number one, making moves that are purely kind of in the kind of aesthetic, and number two, making things that can be built. For example, for the Olympus project, I know it's not exactly the same, but we 3D printed the stuff that would be 3D printed on the moon, right? On a 3D printer that we have here. And then we saw, okay, so what are the overhang angles? What is all this stuff? Does this, like, at least physically, is there a logic to this form? And there was, right? It worked. At least the overhang angles and all this other stuff didn't really they didn't become like a prohibitive thing. So you can't just, especially with projects like this, where people's lives are at stake, especially on the moon, for example. And if an emergency happens there, what do you do?
Yeah.
So you can't just sort of say like, oh, why is it like this? Not because we thought it would be nice, and then we're like, all right, cool. So now I'm getting 10 times the radiation that I would get otherwise, and the habitat can only be sort of filled with people for 2 days instead of the 30 days that it should be. So you don't really have that kind of leeway out there.
I think that's also
Just look, yeah.
like a bit of a secret to like why Big has built so much in a short period of time. Like a lot of our stuff is buildable, or there's thinking behind it.
Yeah, and there's also an army of people sitting in this office all day, every day, figuring out how to do these things, right? Like how can we do these things? What's the best way to do these things? And so there's a lot of like smart people and dedicated people out here working through all these problems.
Yeah. I know we've only got you for a bit, so if anyone doesn't have any questions, you can start raising your hands. I think the last thing I was just going to touch on is like, how is it like actually designing these spaces? I know you guys spend a lot of time looking into like the health and well-being, and trying to replicate environments on Earth, on the Moon and Mars, because you're in a kind of sealed environment, and on the moon, for example, you're on the sunny side of the moon, so there's no night and day. So there was a lot of time like replicating lighting and things like that. So how did that kind of play in like the health and well-being?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because the The habitat, of course, would be a sealed environment, so you wouldn't have the kind of 24-hour day kind of day cycle that you have on Earth. The moon does have a day cycle, but that is I think takes like 29.4 days, where it does a full rotation, and then you're able to sort of go from lunar day to lunar night, and the the temperature difference between the lunar day and the lunar night are absolutely insane.
Crazy.
So you can get up to I think so if it's sunny, you can get up to plus 176 I think Celsius, and if you're in the night side, you can get to minus 243 Celsius, something along those lines. I might be a little off by a couple numbers, but it's it's
Factor
within
100
that
isn't
range.
gonna cover you.
No, it's within. So it's like you basically have to completely seal your environment from the exterior. So that means that you're totally disconnected from the normal day-night cycle that you have here on Earth, and that cycle is what regulates our internal clocks, and how we wake up, eat, are awake, all this other stuff, like even your digestive system. All this stuff is kind of organized with that 24-hour cycle. So what happens is, what we would do is we would create an entire set of kind of lighting controls that would mimic the light that we get here on Earth, in terms of color, color temperature, intensity, and all that stuff, so that the entire habitat itself creates its own sunlight. It creates its own day cycle, right? And that's one of the most important things. And we're also doing that with the Mars habitat. We're trying to do that, organize it so that the Mars habitat is also, which is a Mars analog habitat, it's also sort of enclosed, just to simulate what you would have on Mars, and it would work in a similar fashion where your lighting fixtures have a tremendously important role to play in how your day and night cycle is regulated.
The funny thing is, I guess we've all kind of potentially experienced a minute idea of what it might be like to live on Mars or the moon through COVID and being locked down in our own apartments, where we still have the luxury of like looking outside windows, maybe a balcony, maybe like a park nearby. And even if you didn't have those last two things, like a balcony and a park, you started to go a little bit crazy. So
Yeah. I mean, for example, for this project that we just unveiled with NASA and ICON, which is the project, the Crew Health and Performance Exploration Analog, called CHAPEA, which is the acronym for that. That's what they will do, right? They will have crew members, and you can sign up too if you want. If you go to the NASA website, you go to nasa.gov/CHAPEA, you can sign up. They're recruiting people for year-long simulated Mars missions, and then you can sign up to be there for a year and sort of simulate as if you were living on Mars. So you have your 24-minute time delay in communication to the outside.
Are you gonna go? You have to preach.
I would love to. I would love to go, but unfortunately, I think I'm not a U.S. citizen yet, so I don't think I can
that
make
NASA
it.
stuff,
But,
you have to be a citizen, right?
I think that's one of the I think that's one of the requirements. Maybe not. I don't know. But I don't know. I would definitely. I think it's a very interesting experiment. And the other thing is that the teams are being formed based on people's psychological profiles,
right.
just to make sure that in such a long mission, because you're going to be basically in a 1,700 square foot.
Yeah. You do not want to accidentally recruit an asshole into that group.
Exactly. You don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Or two or three, and then what, So you have to make sure that the mix of people in the team makes sense for you to be able to actually live through the mission, because what they have found in long-term duration missions is that crew morale and crew sort of cohesion and crew performance is very linked to the kind of social aspect of the relationship between the crew
Yeah,
members, and
that
so
makes total sense.
it's like it's a non-trivial part
I
of
mean,
the future of kind
it
of
would be the
space
ultimate
exploration.
thing for an architect. Like you would be the guy living what you designed, and then you realize what if
Yeah,
you made any adjustments, what you could make, and like
I bet, yeah. I mean, I think I would be yes. That is true. But you would
yeah,
also go sort of crazy. What argue? Why did you move that chair? You know, who left this storage space here? Like this is a disaster. Why are you? But but it is true. I mean, one thing that we did. I watched a lot of movies. I watched that documentary on. I can't remember. My memory is terrible. There's a documentary on this biosphere. I can't remember the name. I think it's on Netflix but anyway. So I watched that. I listened to a podcast called Habitat that I think I recommend for all of you guys to go and listen to. That's like 6 episodes, but it just chronicles the life of of an analog habitat and what happens within analog habitat. And then you'll see that a lot of the stuff that happens there, because of, nobody has ever designed these habitats as sort of an architect would, right? People just come in there and be like, all right, let's make 4 rooms, whatever, and lay it out in whatever way that it is laid out. So you end up with situations where, for example, when you open your bedroom door, you're immediately in the living room and kitchen with all these people, right? So you never have a moment of like being, in private. Like you're either in your room and that is your only private moment, or you're like in the middle of everyone. So that's one of the things that we changed with our habitat, where if you want to go from your bedroom to the washroom in the morning to shower, you don't have to go through the living room and the kitchen. There's a sort of private area and then a more public area, and then you choose when to be public. You're never forced to be public. I think that's the like little things like that are gonna make a huge difference when it comes to living in Mars or for a year or whatever with the exact same people, with three
yeah,
other people. So those are things that you don't really think about as like particular skills that are usual kind of useful, but that's what architects think about, and that's what we have to offer to the kind of space
yeah,
enterprise.
for sure. I know we got a couple questions, and I think we've only got you for a little bit longer. So, Mayura, I haven't seen you for a little while. How's it going?
It's going good. Hi, Oli. Hi, Faisal. Hi, Julian. Nice to see you guys, and it's amazing conversation.
Hi, Meyer.
Yeah. I have one incident to share and one question. So it's interesting, like you guys were discussing about 3D printing. So I attended a conference called IASS, International Association for Shell and Spatial Structures, in Barcelona 2019. And there was a section on 3D printing, and there were like amazing papers and research work about drone printing, self-moldable form work, which is like very sustainable. And there was one professor from UK who said, okay, 3D printing is not the future. And like, oh, that's a strong claim. So I talked with him and later, and he said like, if let's say, if you're like prefabricating a beam, a concrete beam, like using 3D printing layer by layer is definitely gonna take more time compared to like a pouring concrete and like settling it. So he said like a hybrid 3D printing plus prefabrication is a way to go. And I thought, and like I also worked like on a research project where we were like doing 3D printing with plastic polymers, and there were like few elements which I thought like prefabrication will definitely like reduce the time for that habitat. So the question I have is like the challenge which we were facing at that time is like for concrete beam and steel we have a lot of testings for like the stability and the strength of the beam, but we don't have like those testing protocols. Like a lot of test has been done, and for those materials. So how do you deal with that? And like, what's the sustainability aspect of this? Like, do you have like after you dispose that habitat, like, or if something cracks and it goes into the space, like, is it harmful or something?
Um, so I guess there's a two part. So the first, in terms of testing, I know that for for the projects that have been built, testing like strength of the 3D printing kind of concrete material has been done, and so for that I wouldn't be too concerned. It's just as strong. I think actually from the test that they have, the compression test, the material that Icon has been using is stronger than concrete. And for the environmental aspect of it, I mean, for example, the lunar habitat would be built with lunar regolith, right? So it would be basically as how they have rammed earth houses and stuff like that, rammed earth walls. So it would be a similar sort of setup where you just use the material that you have on the moon to build it. Now, granted, lunar regolith is extremely harmful to human health. You can't really breathe it in because it is so sharp. Like it's like tiny little grain sands that are extremely sharp. So you're like breathing sort of like little knives. So astronauts would always be sort of shielded from lunar dust, whether it is on the hermetically sealed habitat or the spacesuits or vessels that they inhabit. So that would be for the lunar habitat. And in terms of health aspects, I think it's the same. It's like the same sort of set of ingredients that go into concrete, that are the base ingredients that go into concrete that go into the mix that Icon uses. And I can't really talk much about that because number one, I don't know what their mix is because it's proprietary. But what I do know is that they've already built houses and habitable spaces, so I'm pretty sure it will be
Also,
safe.
just from a technology point of view, I think like the comment on like we can't test it and that kind of stuff. I think it's not that difficult. Like once you know the structural properties of a print, you can plug that into a program like Strand or computationally analyze it pretty easily. But I do think there's that material aspect of 3D printing and 3D printing with bio-based materials and stuff like that is definitely evolving at the same time.
Yeah.
Here on Earth, at least.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I know for a fact that you wouldn't be allowed to be building all this stuff if it wasn't structurally sound. So for sure, there have been tests and all that stuff has been sort of tested and done, and it continues as it continues to evolve. I'm sure these guys are going to figure out ways to make it stronger and make it even better.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Sorry, man. I just wanted to ask on this. Are there building regulations for the moon?
For the moon?
No, not that I am aware of. No, no. But that's an interesting sort of area of knowledge because there are treaties about all kinds of stuff. But right now, it seems like whoever gets there first.
I was going to say, who would set it? I guess the U.S. has a flag there, so does that mean they own it?
No, that just means that you got there first, and then you can just go build bases. But this is one of those things that can become an opportunity for human beings to sort of stop being so sectarian, so kind of like sectarian, and then just like go and be like, all right, so we're all just going to build this thing. Because in the end, if you're in the moon, it doesn't matter if you're Chinese or Russian or American. You're out there. You have to collaborate with each other, otherwise you're all more.
What about those things like I remember like a few years ago it was like kind of a cool thing at Christmas to buy someone a piece of the moon. But I wondered, how does that work now? Like, you start to build
I
there,
Yeah,
you're
have
like,
no
Moon.
idea
wait a
about
minute,
that.
I got that in like 2010 for Christmas. You're building on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You gotta start. Yeah, you
Yeah.
gotta start charging rent for your land, kind of
Or
owned
that was
land.
just a complete scam and you don't own anything. Yeah.
I am pretty sure that was a scam. I don't think you can sell something that cannot be owned. Yeah.
Cool. I see we got one other question, maybe if you have time, Julian. I
Yeah,
see Z.
totally.
Z.
Hey, Seattle.
Hey, sorry if
Hi, how are you
I
guys?
pronounced that incorrectly. Do you want to jump in and ask a question or add anything?
Yes, I do. So I have a question. So my niece is interested in being, I guess, going into architecture. So my question is, what software should she be looking into as a high schooler?
That's a good question. Maybe Ollie, you're good
I
to
mean, if it's high
answer that.
school, I would start with something fun and playful. There's a program called SketchUp, which is made by Google. A lot of architects do actually use it, but it is like a more of a playful side. Like, we don't use it in the office right now, but SketchUp, I would say, is for a high school student, like, fun, easy to pick up. You'll understand like the world of 3D modeling from that. And then, if as they get more serious, I'd recommend a program called Rhino, or Rhinoceros, it's called. But yeah, SketchUp's kind of a fun way to start. Or the video game Sims, and just start building a house there.
Ziada, didn't your niece also want to get into sort of space architecture? I know you were telling me about that
Yeah,
before.
she does. So she wanted to know something about. I think it's called an Earth ship or
Oh,
something of the sort. But she specifically wants to get into
do
space
you know there are
architecture,
courses on?
Yeah,
and she wants to know if it's if this is something that she should go into at her age. Is it going to be like valuable in the
There,
future? So those
there
are some
are already
questions that she did
masters
have.
in. I know some people reached out who have done masters in space architecture already, which I was kind of like, wow, there's you can specialize in that already. I don't.
yeah. I met. Yeah, that's
Oh,
totally. I
that's
met
cool.
this girl who has a master's in space architecture and has worked with NASA on designing the sort of like modules for like ISS and things like that, and like integration of different kind of pieces of design into modules or whatever. So it is. I think it is a thing uh, that exists, but I don't know
It's a
that
very
I
niche
mean,
thing still, and I think what you.
yeah, yeah. I would if I were her, I would just get an undergrad in architecture and then go to graduate school in architecture design that specializes in technology, and then learn from that, because you don't want to come out being able to only design architecture for space, because you're going to
Yeah.
miss out on a lot of stuff and a lot of learning that needs to happen before you can, like you have to learn how to design stuff here on Earth, how to design stuff for people before you sort of jump in
Plus
to the deep
your
end, I would say.
thesis, and like, you can study for your undergraduate or your masters, and you can do a thesis on something that's based on space, and like in
Yeah,
the same way Julian has done, like educate yourself whilst you're doing it. And there's some like tutors, I think, that are famous for being more space orientated. But yeah, I would say it's a bit of a niche right now for sure.
yeah, and like the space architecture sort of education remains
I
sort of
mean, no one's
a kind
teaching
of.
it really because no one's done it.
Exactly. No, there's no sort of like rigorous, and if there is, I am unaware of it. Like the rigor sort of. I mean, because the body of
Right.
knowledge just does not exist, right? Like we don't
Yeah.
have the experience of building a permanent structure on the moon. So I think once that starts becoming a little bit more sort of like a viable possibility, then there are going to be people who have the experience, and then there are going to be people who can actually teach things that have a relation to
Well,
the reality of it.
Actually, I wanted to. Sorry, Ollie. I wanted to ask about that earlier. So usually when you do a project, you have a precedent study, right? So was there any precedent studies you did? Because obviously there's never been it's completely new territory, right?
Yeah, we did precedent studies. I mean, the NASA, if you remember, this blows my mind. The last time that there was a man on the moon was something over 50
Yeah,
years
that's
ago,
crazy.
which is absolutely insane. Because can you imagine? So the promise that people were seeing 50 years ago for human beings, like that promise and that dream of like caring about science and going out there and like caring about curiosity and caring about all this stuff, so that didn't really sort of go much further. But then, so what happened in that era, in that time, was that there were a lot of studies done on, okay, so if we were to build a base on the moon, how would it look like? What would the components be? All this other stuff, right? So it does. There are some extremely limited kind of precedents, but for building on the moon. But we do have precedents for building in spaces or living in spaces that are sort of that secluded and that cramped, right? So like nuclear submarines, for example, or like the Antarctica kind of base, or the International Space Station. So we looked at those spaces and see how can we build on the knowledge from those spaces for a kind of reduced volume in habitation, right? And for building on the moon, actual building, that's just going to be a whole new thing.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And perhaps on a less serious note, this is a pressing question I had. You did a lot of research with NASA. Did you find anything about aliens?
I do get asked
Do
about
you know
that
about
every
aliens?
time I talk about this. No, I did not. I
I
did
had to
not. But
ask.
I did not find anything about aliens. But I don't think there's anyone with knowledge of space that thinks that extraterrestrial life is impossible. So, but then you have to start thinking about it. I mean, if you think about the number of planets that exist, is just insane, right? Like, so there's more planets than there are like sand
Grains of
grains
sand.
on
Yeah.
Earth. So just in sheer possibility or sheer just sort of probability, there will be life somewhere. But the question is, like, is it going to be intelligent life? And if it's intelligent life, is it going to be advanced enough to come all the way out here? And that's where there is no definitive proof
I
of
think when you say it
yet.
as well, people think of like a green alien dude on a planet, but it literally be like a little piece of
Yeah.
bacteria or like.
It can just,
Yeah.
it could just be bacteria. Most likely, life on other planets is going to be bacteria or,
Yeah. It's not.
things like that.
Oh
So,
yeah, but
and
by the way, is there any consideration about the effect that we're gonna have on the moon? Sort of taking not just us and our material, but also things like viruses and bacteria, archaea, things like
I
that.
mean, it's for example, there was, that all of the Apollo, actually, I think it was the Apollo astronauts, before they went to the moon, they went into a
Like
14,
quarantine.
what is it, like a 14-day quarantine. And then when they came back from the moon, they also went into a 14-day quarantine because people here were worried that the astronauts would be bringing back lunar viruses that we
Space
had no
COVID.
protection for.
Oh,
Exactly, they were preemptive the space COVID, and that did not come to pass. There was no such thing as
I
space
mean, it's a
COVID
vacuum, so
because we were,
nothing exists there. So there's nothing. Well,
nothing exactly, and the environment is so kind of stale. Like if you put anything that lives on the surface of the moon, it's gonna just die. Anything that lives here on Earth, if you put it out there, is just not gonna survive. So I don't think there's a lot of concern for that. And as I said, you're not thinking of the moon as a kind of permanent sort of city building project or like an Earth number two. You're just thinking of it as a way to kind of expand
it's a base.
your sort of reach within space. Yeah, for many reasons, but yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that you touched on earlier, Ollie, was that a lot of people ask, like, wait, why would
Right.
we do this? Why would we like go out and like try to figure this stuff out? It doesn't make any sense. We have plenty of problems here on Earth, and the truth is that we do have plenty of problems here on Earth. But whenever you talk about sending a mission to Mars or building something on Mars, none of the money that you're spending actually goes to Mars. None of the money that you're spending actually goes to the moon, right? All of that money, all the resources stay within Earth because you're paying people to design this thing. You're not sort of basically sending literal money and wasting it on Mars or on the moon or whatever. But aside from that, planet Earth is going to come to an end someday. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, probably not within thousands, and probably not within millions of years. But it will come to an end eventually, because all planets have life cycles, the way that stars have life cycles, the way that people have life cycles. So if human beings do not become a multiplanetary species, they will go extinct eventually. So if we don't do this, if we don't start sort of making like little baby steps towards doing that, then we're going to guarantee that we are sort of a kind of one planet wonders in the universe. And so if that is not a sort of urgent matter or like a prompt for people to care about this, then I don't really know.
It is worrying
what
that
is.
like these billionaire geniuses are all trying to create a second place to live or escaping to their bunkers in New Zealand. Like, it is worrying that
Mm-hmm.
I've heard conspiracy theories that they're doing it because they're going to blow up the Earth, so they're finding a new home
I mean,
to move to.
I don't think we need billionaires to blow up Earth. I think we can like just go like just think about what happens when you go here in New York to get if you get takeout. There's like 45 different little pieces of plastic that people give you just to eat like a muffin, And so it's just like we can do that without the need without needing billionaires.
plus if they do that, they'll no longer be billionaires.
Yeah, yeah, and if you look at it, really, what billionaires are doing is it's very focused on transportation, because there's a lot of money to be made on that. So like it's not like SpaceX is losing money, there's a lot of money to be made on transportation. But the problem is that it's an industry that requires a lot of upfront investment and money that a lot of people are just not willing to risk. But if you have all this cash and there's a potential reward at the end that is pretty large, then why not? So there's very few people in the world who can actually undertake that type of investment, and they do make it. So yeah, SpaceX is a transportation company, as
Blue
is
Origin.
Blue Origin.
Blue Origin.
Yeah, they just think about this. Like NASA, after the end of the end of the what's the name of this program? Where you had the Challenger,
Apollo
the Endeavour, and all this stuff. The Apollo missions were before, when you would go actually to the moon, and then after that ended, and Nixon saw that stuff was just way too expensive, so they designed this shuttle that would just go into the lower Earth orbit. So it was a much sort of cheaper way to continue research on space, but he didn't really have the ambition of actually going to the moon or going anywhere kind of farther out. So when that kind of ended, I think it was in the 90s, there was no way for American astronauts to get to the International Space Station. So American astronauts have been basically flying on Russian rockets to get to a space station. So they're always riding on the Soyuz to get up there. And it was only up until I think it was last year when SpaceX sent the first American astronauts to the ISS, that now America again has the capability of sending people to space, because there was a decade where we had to rely on Russia to send people up there. And that was, not only embarrassing, but also just what are we doing, guys? Like, you know, so that was a little kind of insane. But now SpaceX is making all kinds of money from bringing American astronauts to.
I think that moment where I saw
space
the
station.
SpaceX like boosters come down to Earth and land next to each other, like I watched that, I was like, that's an animation, and then I was like, wait a minute, that's real? yeah.
No, that blew my like that blew my mind. I had goosebumps when I saw that, and I'm
Yeah.
like, this is absolutely insane. Like, what is going, like, this opens up a kind of worms that is just absolutely kind of amazing, and it has, and and it did, and it will
Anyway, I
continue to.
know you're short on time, so I won't keep you any longer. But I will ask one quick last question: is like, if you get an opportunity, are you going to Mars? Would you do it?
I wanted to ask the same
Yeah,
thing.
Would I
or the
go to
moon, I guess,
Mars? I mean, if I have,
for a holiday.
if they
Tennis.
have a
Oh man,
tennis
Or
court,
site visit.
if they have tennis
yeah.
courts, I would go
You a
absolutely.
big
But
tennis guy?
otherwise, I don't know. No, yeah, I love playing tennis. Man.
Dude, the
Tennis
courts
is
would
so
be
much fun,
giant.
and they have to be massive. But then you'll be able to jump
That
so
would be
much,
sick.
and
We should make a little virtual
it
reality
would be
game
kind of
of
insane.
space
Yeah,
tennis.
of playing tennis on
Yeah. Actually,
like a football
why is no
size
one
court.
doing that
I
right now?
think that's
Making
what
a
probably would happen.
Space Olympics video game for like the Oculus or something. There we go. Let's
There you
get
have
on
it.
that. We'll
There
chat
you
afterwards. We'll
have
make a
it,
room.
man. Yeah, exactly. We'll get the
All right,
IP
dude.
and
Well,
all the
thank
stuff
you so
sorted
much
out.
for talking with us. Make sure everyone to give Julian a follow and here on Clubhouse. He's new to Clubhouse, so welcome him to Clubhouse, and also on his Instagram. I'm sure you'll see more interesting stuff coming from that. So, Julian, thanks again for coming. We do have a talk next weekend, same time. We have got Randy Deutsch coming to talk to us about super users and his book Super Users. Definitely one to check out. If you want to read it before, you can get it off Amazon. I don't think it's that expensive, but it's super interesting about the kind of future of design technology, architecture, and the future of practice. And so we'll be having a chat with him. But otherwise, thanks again, Julian. Hope everyone has a good Sunday, and we'll see you next weekend.
Awesome.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to join you guys, and thanks everyone who joined. Thank you.
Yeah,
All right.
this was
Thanks,
great.
everyone.
Thanks, Julian.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thanks,
everyone.
guys.
Thanks,
Bye.
See you.
Julian.
Bye.